Politicians, ladies and gentlemen, now you can hear me. First of all, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you here to St. Luke's Church for this very special evening as part of the Lennox Robinson Literary Festival. I applaud the organisers who last year mounted this very successful weekend focusing on the work of Lennox Robinson, but I'm happy to say this year they have built upon the success of last year. Irene O'Callaghan and I know other committee members as well, and those involved, have built it up, and hopefully it will become a permanent feature here in Douglas, celebrating the life and work of Lennox Robinson. I was in the Crawford Gallery recently, and I happened to be passing by, well, first of all, there's a portrait of Lennox Robinson in the Crawford Gallery, but just inside the door there were other portraits as well. And I discovered there also a portrait of Lennox Robinson's father, who was a clergyman. And although he wasn't rector here in Douglas, or he lived in Douglas, but Billy tells me he served in Kinsale and other parts of Cork. So Lennox Robinson grew up in a church environment, he grew up in a rectory, and he knew what it was to sit on hard pews for long sermons on a Sunday. Anyway, that didn't dent his literary success and his output. So I have much pleasure now in sitting down and taking very much a back seat tonight. But again, I'm delighted that the church can be used and open for an occasion such as this. And I hand over now to Billy and the organisers, and I look forward to a lovely evening of hearing the works of Professor Chang as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Good evening. My name is Irene, and I've been asked to announce the evening's programme and to introduce the readers. Billy O'Callaghan will read first, followed by the festival's very special guest, who has travelled all the way from Taipei to be here with us tonight, Ying-Tai Chang. After Ying-Tai's reading, I will introduce Taiwan's Ambassador to Ireland, Simon S.K. too. Ambassador too will give a short speech and will then, on behalf of the festival's committee, make the presentation to Ying-Tai of the 2015 Lennox Robinson Literary Award. So tonight's first reader is Billy O'Callaghan. Billy is a native of Douglas and is the author of the critically acclaimed short story collections In Exile and In Too Deep, both published by Mercier Press, and The Things We Lose, The Things We Leave Behind, published in 2013 by New Island Books, which earned a 2013 Bord Gáis Energy Irish Book Award, one of the country's most prestigious literary awards. Selected as Ireland's sole representative for UNESCO's 2014 Cities of Literature project, his award-winning stories have been translated into Polish, Portuguese and Turkish, published in such major literary magazines and journals around the world as the Bellevue Literary Review, Confrontation, the Fiddlehead, Hayden's Ferry Review, the Kenyon Review, the Kyoto Journal, the Los Angeles Review and Narrative Magazine, as well as being broadcasted on RTE's The Book on One, Sunday Miscellany and the Francis McManus Award Series. Billy O'Callaghan.
Thank you. Okay, can everyone hear me, first of all? Okay. Usually, when I give readings, I select a story from one of my books, but this evening I decided to read something new. I worked on this story for a long time, and late last year it was published in the Hawaii Pacific Review. But even when a story is finished, I often keep working on it, so this is the latest draft. The things that broke my father will someday break me too. After the dreams have come, the mornings feel like glass around me. Everything looks too bright, too well preserved. My way of coping is to sit in the kitchen in silence and try to wait it out. I don't close my eyes because the faces hang there in that darkness, ready to loom. Faces that will make me smile to see again, but which will also bring deep sadness, knowing that they've been lost, that I have let them go. The house is always still then, silent apart from the acceptable sounds, the clicking of pipes in the walls, water running at a murmur, the paper weight of my own breath, and Barbara's as she idles about small chores, maybe rain against the glass or the crack of snow shifting its weight on the roof. While the coffee percolates, I sit and try not to move or even think, knowing too well the traps and pitfalls that lie in those directions. I like to watch Barbara buttering toast. It's a small thing, but it softens the solitude. She scrapes the slices with a knife, then cuts them into triangles. We're middle-aged and have dug our rut, but plenty have it worse than us. In a lit kitchen, queens can be almost anywhere, and the missing things matter less. The butter is a chemically correct shade of yellow. All along its packaging, it boasts in outright lies about the remarkably comparable qualities of its taste. And in keeping with this trend, the bread is not real bread either, at least not my definition of real. Finger-thick slices, the colour and flavour of dust, with an elasticity that bloats with every chew, and which leaves grains of itself on my tongue and in my teeth. Lately, Barb has been pushing for a switch to one of those probiotic spreads, some kind of low salt content sunflower oil substitute. The change will make no great difference, since it's all just pseudo magic anyway, and empty promises, and I'll probably give in, but not yet, because I'm stubborn. Healthy diets are all the rage, even among the dying, but I still hold out on a few of the details. The way my father and my sister live on in my mind is the way I saw them after I'd broken the news of my going. The old man at the table, head bowed over a mug of hot tea, and across the room, in the chair beside the unlit fire, Anya, her fist clenching and relaxing around an old handkerchief that she held pressed to her lips in an effort to quell the tiny rumblings of her sobs. She was already married by then, and pregnant to a point just beginning to show, barely 20, but bulked and rubbed to a state of middle age. Her hands shone pale and alabaster hard from cold water work, and her hair, the blackness of soot and wild as briar, hung long to her shoulders. Tears came in a strained, wrenching way familiar to our kind, and she let them fall. My father and I waited until she'd gone home before starting on the whiskey. We had a night in early April, the waking part of the season, but with the blanched colours of winter still holding sway. Rain had come in with the evening, following a watery sun's slow traipse across the sky and infusing my last Inishboffin dusk with an ochre tinge that I'd always remember. But it was a soft rain that thinned out with the last of the light, and by 8 or so there was only darkness. Even the wind had fallen. I was 16 and already broad across the chest, afflicted from time spent on the water and squatting in field corners. I was 16 and already broad across the chest, afflicted from time spent on the water and squatting in field corners with a measured stillness and an appreciation of balance in all things. I felt set for the world, innocent enough perhaps to believe in dreams, but capable on a blood level and beating like a drum to run, to see cities and know the press of crowds, to meet and dance with women, to drink, fight, work and swear. At the fireside, I watched pale, powdery beards of ash fringe the turf. A settled redness offered heat but little else to the room, but the level of dark felt right somehow. Better to keep the details hidden, in case minds should change. I could hear the old man lumbering through into the pantry for a bottle, the rubber soles of his boots sucking up damp notes from the flagstone floor, every step laid down heavy. "Here," he said, his voice all crust, pressing the space. "Get this down, you boy." His best whiskey, 2 years locked away and still with its seal unbroken. I took the offered glass and raised it for the filling. He poured in splashes, then hauled the other armchair in close to the fire. We'd not long finished clearing the back field of rocks, an acre and a half that had taken the better part of a month, and the pull of such work still lay heavy on our bodies. So sitting felt good. "Easy with it," my father said, watching me in the dark. "Don't force it down, that's the trick. Let it find its own way." For a while we drank. I held myself close to the fire, taking the heat against my face even after my skin had acquired a papery stiffness, and tried not to look at him because even in the dark there was too much to see, too many marks. When we spoke at all, we kept mainly to the subject of the weather, how bad the winter had been for the fishing, and worse, with so much wind, for the soil, or occasionally mumbled words, rising up in hesitant jabs, and then out of embarrassment falling away again. The sense of goodbye lay within the night's grain, and the silence made that a sad thing to bear. But the silence was still easier than words. In the low firelight, the glass glowed, and the whiskey, warmed from the outside in by the casual inductance of my cupping hands, tasted unexpectedly sweet. I was new at the time to the stuff, and it burned and then soothed my mouth. Through the infusions of raw and malted barley, a terrific watery cleanness, and then the peaty aftershock. I braced myself for what I felt certain had to come, the plea to stay, its tone infused with threat or blackmail. But the matter was already decided. By morning, no matter what was said, I'd be on the boat across, and then Dublin, perhaps London, perhaps in time New York. No set plans beyond the running. It's natural, of course, to reminisce, especially as we age, and regret is a flavour familiar to anyone who has ever fled one life in search of another. I was 16 when I left, and mired in some half-formed state between childhood and the ways of adults. Most of the time I cling to this as my excuse, and most of the time it is enough. But the truth is that I'd already felt the loom of an end. Some weeks earlier we'd been down in the bottom field, laying out a turf rick, and the old man had straightened from his stoop and went to lean against the wall. His mouth hung open, and his staring eyes shone dark against the waxy flats of his face. Weariness was part of it, but levels of exhaustion were facts of our lives, and this was something more convoluted. "We'll stop a while, boy," he said, and though his voice retained an element of composure, it seemed detached and not quite natural in how it used its air. "Sure, there's legs in the day yet." I averted my gaze, considering instead the rash of cloud that cloaked without quite obliterating the colourless smudge of sun. I longed to sit too, and the support of the stone wall looked inviting, but I allowed myself only a minute's pause before bending again to the chore, knowing that the day would not end for us until the work did. I gathered up the bricks of turf and stacked them as I'd been shown, laying them into place thick side down so that the rick could waterproof itself over months' worth of drying time. Working steadily, focusing on the order of the job, and trying to ignore the ache dug into the low of my back. Cold grey mud packed the folds of my neck and coated my hands like a leprous second skin, and I tasted and breathed it, feeling the sourness of its soupy grit between my back teeth whenever I clenched my jaw. There was no way to erase what I'd seen, but island boys and men know well enough what fits the silence and what does not, and the shadows that greyed and blunted my father seemed a harbinger of sorts. He did not die that day in the field, or even that year, but he did seem to skirt a brow of some hill around that time, because what followed was degrees of slow, meticulous disintegration. That day, stacking the turf, I considered the old man's blanched expression, the accepted horror within the downturned eyes, the mouth that sucked and bubbled like a stab wound, rabid for the cold, refreshing air, and the image that stormed my mind was of my mother, laid out in a lamplit bedroom, dead at barely 30, and looking as if she had never lived at all. The sudden thunder crack of an aneurysm ripped her from the world and reduced her to that smoke-yellowed mannequin state, mute as space and stiffer than any bone. Her raven hair unnaturally flat without the pull of wind to turn it feral, tendrils of fringe boxing in her broad forehead. Because I'd been so young, the details that I remember seem detached from one another and have to be stitched together with lines of logic. I remember how quickly the house had filled, but people continued to arrive through most of the night. Women carrying cakes or plates of cold sliced meat, men laden with dark unmarked bottles and jugs of stout, or hauling sacks of pig's trotters that would be left to boil for hours and soften to a state of almost unbelievable sweetness. As the space thinned, I was moved from my place on the couch and resettled on the flagstones beside the empty fire, given no choice but to stand. Anya, my sister, kept me at her side and held my hand, with her fingers tightly entwined, so as to discourage thoughts of escape. But it was an unnecessary precaution. Fear kept me still, fear that was different from the anxiety I felt for strange soundings in the night, or those things the darkness masked. Because this time the worst had already happened, and the aftermath lay before me as a hole in the world. My mind that night of my mother's wake was full of many things, but heaviest in my thoughts was a memory of something she had once told me, months or a year earlier. Her voice exasperated and yet full of compassion as she knelt before me and wrapped a piece of cotton gauze around yet another of my badly skinned knees. "You know, Billy," she said, "if you don't run so much, you won't fall so much." Standing holding hands with Anya in that crowded living room, I let those words roll through me again and again, and there was still a sense of calm to be had from the gentle remembered float of her voice. But from the little I glimpsed through the bedroom door the previous night and again that morning, stillness seemed to me a far worse fate than falling. Surely there were times when the feel of all that chasing energy was more than worth the tumble and the skinned knee. At that age, I couldn't fully understand what had happened, but I sensed enough to realize what death must mean, and it was the reverence that the word earned which made me feel so afraid. Beside me, Anya's breathing had the thin put-upon texture of shocked calm, and her fingers between mine were cold and dry, as if some essence of who she was had retreated, taking all her heat with it. But I was glad of the touch and of the promised reassurance offered by skin against my skin. We stood there, tasting the good wintry aroma of the sweet boiling trotters, thickening the air and insinuating every pore, afraid to speak, but watching the tide of familiar faces. Neighbours bunched in groups, their cheeks reddened from whiskey, their mood sombre, especially as the light softened and was lost, and the time came for lanterns to be lit. Across the crowded room, ignored by everyone, my father sat on the edge of a hard chair, head bowed, weeping, finished as a felled tree. Sometimes when the bodies shifted momentarily apart, I could see his thick shoulders heaving against the punch of tears. And whenever the whenever the murmured conversations hit a lull, the sound of his pain carried through the house, forlorn as the lowing of something bestial across a span of fields. That weeping held through the terrible days that followed, shaking us as we huddled at the hearth side of the sloping graveyard's open ground, while rain lathered our faces, and it continued after we returned home and were folded once more into that small house's gloom. But at some point it did soften, to be replaced with a kind of silence that told its own story. Glimpsed through a doorway left ajar, death for me is and will always be a curtained bedroom, yellowed and set off kilter by a burning lantern. And on the bed, a face calm but too still, known but no longer quite right, the muscles too relaxed, the shape pulled back in every wrong direction. Once seen, it had felt the thing impossible to forget or deny. Yet somehow, and for a long time, I managed to find a way of doing both. But that day in the field, the month or so before my leaving, there it was again. Not the same, but with enough shared traits to make me remember. I laid the turf in place and thought of how things would be a year from now. And then I thought about running. People die every day. The world is full of little voids. My mother had slipped from a living, breathing, laughing state to a still and yellowy husk, and part of the overgrown hillside tucked beneath the winds and crooked stones. And not alone either, but there with her people, the old stock who lived and died before my time, as well as the minute's worth of nameless younger sister that I'd seen only as a dreamy blueness through a grey threadbare bedsheet, and in my mind in the darkness can sometimes see still. That hillside bulged, but still the shadow roamed, insatiable, seeking and marking out, separating weaklings for the cull. In a city like New York, in a city like Dublin even, no one thinks this way. In cities, steel and stone are the tangibles, and death is just death, a fact of life and an end to things. Stories are for the pages of books, told sometimes to pleasure or to scare, but with no room for belief in ides or omens. It has to do with different sets of freedoms. On those mornings after the dreams have come, Barbara brings coffee and sits with her back to the windows, facing the open kitchen door so that she can see through into the hallway, always waiting for something, some news from afar, even if it's just the morning paper. Sometimes she hums little snatches of whatever song she has woken with in her mind. And when the stillness becomes too much, she rises again and switches on the radio. It is always the same, a grumbling of static, music jerking in and out of tune, and then either a news station or something gentle and innocuous, 60s and 70s hits, but with the volume kept low. We listen, finish our coffee and toast, then reach for bowls and the cereal. These days we eat muesli. Eggs are high in cholesterol, and bacon has become like a swear word. But muesli is meant to be good for the heart, or the bowels, or something. The whole thing is a farce, shadow play. After the dreams have come, and the bindings of time broken, what is gone feels far more immediate, more enlivened, than what is supposed to count as the here and now. Such mornings fill me with the sensation of having been cast adrift. I sip my coffee and quietly digest my breakfast, knowing that I properly belong nowhere. As good as New York has been to me, I was not born for these streets. Across the table, Barbara, full of her own concerns, seems content in leaving me to my silence. But I know that, were she to press me into conversation, my words could come only in Irish. This would probably amuse and then frighten her, and the thought of it frightens me too. But I sense that it would be like splitting an artery. I chew muesli and keep my eyes open, inhaling with care, because the bare stone walls of my father's cottage feel suddenly only a breath away. The small kitchen window coated with the salt grit of the ocean wind, and the whistling drafts where the ceiling putty has crusted and turned to powder. If I try at all, I can feel the heavy wool of an old sweater across my back and shoulders, a thing passed down, the thick shape of it sagging around me several sizes too big, but its weight comforting against the bleak days, its odour filling my mouth with sooty, slightly gamey sweetness, a familiar taste that itches my tongue and lights a fire deep down in my throat. And when the wind catches just right in the eaves, it can pass almost for the high keening of Anya. Deep in one of the ancient laments she so loved to sing, as she busies herself with collecting breakfast eggs from the small coop, or struggles with a slopping pail of water from the communal pump at the bottom of the hill. Inishboffin is my home, even still, but the connections to the place are too long lost, the damage irreparable. My father died within 2 years of my leaving, Anya also gone. There were the boys, her sons, my nephews, 3 of them, steps of stairs, but they are grown men now and have themselves long since abandoned the island. They have my address, but none of them have kept in touch, as so often happens. They can't be blamed. They don't know me. I'm a name, that's all. Someone they will have heard their mother mention. Someone to look up if they ever happen to find themselves in New York, who can speak if pressed as they do, and who will offer food and a bed, money if needs be. I am nothing to their lives, but even though I only know them from the flattened expressions of the photographs that Anya used to send every Christmas time without fail, they are in a way everything to me, because they remain the last surviving links to my past, to who I was before I started trying so hard to be someone else.